Welcome to the Consulting Leaders Podcast, where we talk about the business of consulting. Whether you're looking to grow your practice or learn from the stories of leaders in consulting, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Guillaume Jouvencel, ex-PwC and co-founder of GHA Marketing. Join me as I interview the best consultants in their niche. Let's get on with the show. Glenn, welcome to Consulting Leaders.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here with you on a Friday morning.
It is a pleasure. Let's jump straight into it. What pulled you from being an operator to CEO, to founder, to turnaround specialist into executive coaching, Glenn?
It's a lot of life packed into that. It was a number of things. I think just having kind of a broad set of experience, and I ran family businesses, in my 30s and early 40s. I launched 3 ventures. 2 were successful. One was an abject failure, which is actually the best way to learn, which, most people that I do don't talk about the failures, which is, as we go through cycles. I've been through the .com, I've been through, the tech buildup currently, and, not everybody wins, but having seen the other side, I think was very interesting to me, and looking at some consistency around, high growth. I just started recognizing some patterns, and I wanted to be more, I think, leverage my experience, some of it hard won, to how to help people kind of navigate the turbulence of growth, and because it is very turbulent. And I work with mostly first time founders or high growth founders as they scale. Things just get very different. If you're 10 people, if you're 20 people, it's a very different internal dynamic around decision making, goal setting, building feedback loops, that I found very compelling for me. I wish I would have had it, basically. So I wish I would have had someone like me to help, frame that experience.
So I love the background. Tell us more about what problem you solve now. What is it that you help people achieve, basically?
That's a great question. A couple of things. One, it's being able to, solving this problem with scaling. So scaling, or velocity, as I like to call about, comes with, it's a goal for everybody I work with. I work in, high tech, early stage. I work with high growth PE-backed consolidation firms, and I work in, engineering services. And they all have these characteristics of growth. Sort of double digit, multiple ARR growth in tech. And, part of the problem with growth comes velocity, but also comes drag, around go to market motions, around product, clarity, around a number of, symptoms that I help them identify. And the typical founder I work with, that can't sit back and look at that. They need to design a system, not just design a set of tactics. So first of all, there's fairly consistent symptoms around drag. People avoid each other. They avoid, difficult conversations. They avoid, getting clear. They lead with opinions and biases. I hear a lot of language. I feel like we really need to do this thing. And that's not data driven. That's based on subjective, filters that someone brings, an internally unexamined set of biases into that equation. And that comes at a high cost. And so I help people just fundamentally see that, they have these set of symptoms, and just trying to change the symptoms doesn't really work. They have to, a good analyst, you have to look at what's driving the system that's creating that. And it's around people's relationship with ambiguity. And that has a lot of internal discord, and it's a lot fairly unexamined for a lot of people. They have, it's usually just, if there's fear that comes up around imposter syndrome, or around not getting it right, or, alienating my co-founder, or or letting my investors down. So their tendency is just to, create a lot of communication overhead around adding more people, you know, digging their heels in. And so I help them just kind of see that, we're really designing a system. I ask them, let's step back and kind of take a look at, be a good, purveyor or a surveyor of, what's going on in the system. And it has, whatever vertical I'm in, and I operate, in, 3 or 4, pretty distinct verticals. They're pretty much the same. Founders, tend to like kind of hijack the growth mechanisms, and the teams kind of recede, and the net effect is things just slow down. So that's the number one problem. And then I build a system for them to start communicating more effectively with each other, more inquiry based, more curiosity based, really more data driven, which relies on, let's bring some critical thinking. We have a product we're going to market and we're not getting good signal in the go to market motion. Let's look at, let's be able to spin a, alternative hypothesis and collect some data. And usually people are so tied to, what they're doing, they can't sit back and say, what signal are we getting? What do we need to pay attention to? And that the drag the cost of that drag can go on weeks and for months. So first of all, one of the things I do at a very early stage, I have I ask them just to, I have a little simple equation. Let's calculate the cost of drag in your organization. I have a team in Portland I was, talking to, and I've worked with them before, doing an offsite, and we ran a test. They were designing on a performance management system, and I said, there was like 5 people on the team. They had kind of kicked this can down the road, i.e. drag, for about 8 weeks. And then we just did the pure math. All right, blended rate of all of you every week meeting and not deciding, avoiding, it was like a $30,000, drag. How do we get through that? And what are the assumptions you're bringing into these interactions with each other that are, protective in nature? I don't want to alienate my fellow founder. I don't want to get it wrong. And so then we designed like a critical way through that to address it. Like, what's a step you could take to solve that? So first of all, look what it cost you. And when they see it just in dollars and cents, it's kind of mortifying for them. And it's so patterned in their behavior that, they particularly around scale, but you got to get this decided. And what you're doing is really not working. So what's a step we can take together? Can we, decide and not be totally aligned? Can we make that okay with each other? Which is, we run series of tests around high value things to kind of get us out of that, dynamic. So first of all, avoidance, velocity, and drag. Seeing that it's like, no matter what, this comes with growth and scale.
Yeah.
Any industry's got that.
So it's helping people make better decisions in the face of scale, and then deliver on those decisions.
Yeah. And giving them tools to, in their day-to-day interactions, how they approach with inquiry, understand their own assumptions and their own, part of it is being able to say, I have a limiting belief or a set of assumptions, goes to the adaptive model, that I can't alienate my co-founder, I can't get it wrong for my team. And so these, the set of beliefs is sort of propping up their own internal system. They have an internal system around decision-making that has to be examined. And then they have a collective, system that has to be examined. And once they get some elevation, they can kind of look down on it. Oh, they see that it's kind of interesting. We are all actually complicit in this system being the way it is. And that's kind of a breakthrough moment for them. Where they can see, like, it's not just my team's letting me down, or the market's letting me down. It's like, we are, all co-creators of the system that is, now succumbing to drag. And that's kind of a breakthrough moment with them.
Yeah. Who do you help, Glenn? Who is it specifically? Who do you help? Do you have a specific niche, industry, company size, job title? Who do you work with mainly?
Yeah, it's a good question. I found for the work I do, I typically work with the CEO, founder, Sometimes that's a starting point. Let's look at your own internal system, because they have a lot of the power dynamics that exist in any scaling organization. And so ask them to, let's take you through, this journey of examining your own system. And then frequently they will bring their team in, so generally founder, co-founder, executive leadership team, because they're the ones that are, kind of covering all the, within the organization. They cover all the silos organizationally. So that's, I generally start with the founder. And, my kind of sweet spot historically has been, because I have I'm not a tech person, but I've had pretty deep experience working with Series A early stage technology companies. And certainly with the advent of AI, that's becoming even more prevalent. I work with high growth private companies too. I'm working with a PE backed healthcare company that is doing a roll up across the country, and so I'm working in some of the Midwest markets for them. And then I work where I really got started, and I quantify the work and the lift that's created, because every industry I work in, it's all based on high collaboration. There's a lot, people have to talk to each other as opposed to not talk. I mean, put simply, as opposed to not talk to each other. And so I found that it's all based on interpersonal dynamics, is what we bring, our narrative we bring into these interactions, and be able to examine that is really important. So I got started. I worked for high growth, privately held company, engineering services here in the Pacific Northwest, right before COVID and during COVID. And so symptomatically, they had a lot of churn. People were leaving. And some of the work I did was just begin to understand, well, what's causing these people, to leave, and let's look at the cost that creates for you. So there was like maybe 60 people in the company at that time. And we just, did the rough math. Engineers are, expensive, full burden of the rate is expensive. And they were turning, I don't know, like 20 a year. And, the premise was, what if we could cut that in half? So over time, I worked with them started with the founders, got to the ELT. I ended up working inside the whole organization. And we cut the churn, and actually I was in person initially, and then we were remote during COVID. They doubled in size, and because it's a people business, it's a service business, it's people business, and so being able to get people to collaborate better, it completely hits the P&L in a positive way. So we track margin. And their margins, in gross margins, they gained 7 points. In net margins, they're 2x, and their net profit, because there was no additional overhead burden along with that, went right to the bottom line. And they were able to complete an exit, at a higher valuation as a result.
So founders, and then it can take a tangent to other decision makers within the space, depending on the department that you're gonna be helping with. Cool. And great case study, by the way. How do you get in touch with those founders? Like, what has worked for you to get leads, to knock on the door and be like, hey Glenn, that this could make sense to me? How do you do marketing, Glenn?
I don't. So I have two really good referral pods, which the kind of work I do is, and it's really, it's tied to a lot of my work. I like to examine the results, the impact of the coaching, and track it. So good question. So I trained in the immunity to change framework that's part of the Harvard School of Education. Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy trained there in 2017. And so you're in a cohort. So I have like coaches all around, that have gone through that, training. And so I get referrals from, particularly around some of the teamwork and the tech work that I do. I get referrals from them. In fact, of my current clients, half are from that source. I also get referrals from the Stanford Graduate School of Business environment, which incubates a lot of tech leaders. So those are my two primary referral sources. Occasionally, I'll get one out of the blue, but I don't run any ads. I don't. I'm not. I don't really publish that much on LinkedIn because it's kind of it's a little bit of a fire hose. I think if you do good work and you are connected with people that have networks, I get found. And I'm and I go through a kind of a rigorous fit call. I want to make sure that there's a fit. People have to be kind of curious about their own narrative and what they bring that's creating some of that. So I'm not a good fit for every startup founder. Certainly, if you're not curious, then usually pain creates the curiosity.
So I like that. And I think that's the case, just to be clear, of like 85% of consultants out there. Like they rely mainly on referrals. Have you ever thought about adding something, or are you getting so much business from those referrals that the question of marketing has never been a thing even? How do you think about it?
I certainly, I think like any coach, you think, should I be on Substack or should I create a YouTube channel? I think part of the joy I get. I'm a bad content creator. I know that. Part of the joy I get is, for me, hits about when I see someone, the light come on. So that to me, when they say like, oh, my biggest problem in my life is really listening to the stories in my head and seeing, and there's a blat when I listen to them and I protect these competing commitments that I have to not fail, to not be seen as a fraud, not be seen as an imposter. When that whole thing shifts, that's kind of for me, that's a high value moment personally. I would not, yeah,
No,
a
fair enough.
low leverage moment with me to be like, I'm gonna try to monetize my Substack profile. That has no interest for me.
Mm. No, interesting. And I mean, at the end of the day, the way I see marketing for coaches and consultants is very much, hey, what's the goal, right? If the goal is to reach something that we haven't reached yet, then it might make sense to implement a potential marketing channel.
Mm-hmm.
If the goal is like, hey, everything that I'm doing right now is working and I don't want to break anything, then it doesn't make sense to change anything. So that totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a bit more though, how you move from those referral spots, right, to a conversation, a sales conversation, an SOW, a letter of engagement? What does sales motion look like for you, Glenn?
Well, typically I get someone will reach out to me, whether it's email or, I've got, a lot of former clients and I tend to keep, clients, I retain clients for quite some time, but they might reach out from, someone that they've heard that is a former client. Hey, XYZ person, I'm in the middle of this, someone from Apple, is working in the Apple, environment in their fitness product, and said, and has a personal friend of a former client. Hey, I understand you worked with X, and I'm really interested in like what to having an initial conversation. So I set up a fit call, which is I send like five to six questions for them to answer to kind of reflect like, what are your current challenges? What does it keep you? I mean, there's a fairly defined process. And so then we have a conversation to determine, what's the one thing that's kind of been standing in the way, and what would be the value to them for like gaining, some leverage on that. It's pivotal moment. And then once they've clarified that, and it's really interesting. Sometimes people haven't really thought about that, because a lot of coaches lead with, well, here's how I work. Here's what I don't do any of that. It's like, tell me about you. I want to know deeply about you, deeply and broadly about you. And, part of it is, do you have the capacity to really see your opportunities and also your blocks? And then I sort of say, here's who I typically work with. I work with founders, senior leaders, but mostly founders, and a lot of first-time founders, which is evolved to over time. And I just feel like that, kind of mirrors what this person is telling me. I get, so that's the motion process, and for an initial engagement. And then I kind of go through like how we work together, and I have a fairly structured approach to identifying some initial goals. We do some mental mapping to understand kind of these underlying unexamined assumptions, and then we try to put in place to like gain some traction on some high value goals that have been really elusive for them. And then we reflect a lot their growth, both in session, after session. I keep pretty detailed structure around that. Then quarterly and annually we do a more thorough, what did you learn, it's just deep reflection for them to sit back and the more they're able to reflect on their own growth and experience, the more there are others able to see what other things are still in their way and what other opportunities there are. Typically, like, I've worked with some founders that it's all business. Like they have these like business goals, and then it's like a door opens. I see, and this is interesting. I see some of the same patterns. They see some of the same patterns in their business, difficulties that they have in other parts of their life. How willing would you be to explore that, to experiment what that would look like? How much value would that be? It's a lot of open-ended inquiry for me, and usually people say yes, and then we find a new path to walk down. And not always, and that's fine. I have no doubt.
Of course. I mean, that's interesting. Glenn, I have a bit of a curveball question for you then, because I mean, you have a great career. You have a clearly defined offer. You know who you're working with, and you have a clear ICP. You don't need to market. People come to you. Sales motion is pretty seamless. But the one thing that you mentioned that I like and I want to double down on is qualification, which is these 5-6 questions that you send when someone books a call with you. I think that's something that not enough consultants and coaches do, which actually not only allows you to know more before you get into the call, but also to get the prospect to start engaging, taking some actions. Like they have to, it's not lots of friction, but it's small step that they need to take. Like, oh, this is serious, and you show that you're a pro. So I like this a lot. So you have everything nailed down. What's your biggest challenge? What's the wonder that you're trying to crack? That once you crack, you're gonna take the whole thing to the next level.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and I'm in the middle of cracking it right now, is really understanding how to bring AI into the coaching relationship in a way that helps solve business problems more precisely. A lot of coaching takes place kind of a client we meet, they go off and do something, so we reflect on what they did. I want to get in front of that and help design what they do going forward and tie it to, and I'm in the process of building a toolkit, around session trackers, using some of the adaptive change. So say you have a goal, like what was your competing commitment around having that difficult conversation? What was the cost? So we're able, how do you tie it, and then creating this metrics dashboard around their business that they're in, which can, for tech founders, can be ARR, hires, retention, go-to-market motion. So using tools that really, I've always been, I'm a business head, so I've always been like, I want to demonstrate ROI that they can tangibly see, and AI presents a great opportunity for that. So I think I'm kind of in the middle of that right now. I'm testing it with a couple of clients currently, and helping them. I always, no, don't tell anybody, but I always use my clients to help build my IP. So, they're co-creating it, and what that creates, a great opportunity for them to get buy-in. if they like co-design it with me. What's really valuable for you about seeing, what would be important for you to see on your metrics board, Series A founder, that really is vexing for you? And then session trackers and follow up, and our sessions are really designed to drive towards goals that we can then see through a series of artifacts, quite transparently.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, figuring out how to implement AI in one's coaching practice is the $1 million question right now.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way that is not just like making it look fancy or saving a bit of time, but actually driving a difference for the clients, the customers.
I think a lot of coaches are using AI for client acquisition. To me, it's around deep problem solving
Mm-hmm.
and to make the client experience. Most coaches is in the rearview mirror in a session. Like, tell me what you did last week. Tell me what can we drive toward that we can track together? And when we notice gaps, we can flag it. AI is great for that.
Yeah.
So it's really about designing it's using AI to design user experience.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Glenn Terrell, ladies and gentlemen. Glenn, if people want to find out more about you, see what you do, where should they go?
My website is shinjiconsulting.com. Tells a little bit about me and what I do. You can find me on LinkedIn. Would love to have an initial fit call with anybody. And sometimes, I get inquiries, and if I'm not a fit, it's like, I have a great network of people that do. If you want a career coach, that's not me, but I know a lot of people are in that business. And so knowing your sweet spot and sticking to that is really important. But you can find me at shinjiconsulting.com.
Awesome. We'll put all the links in the description. For what I'm concerned, you've gained at least one new connection on LinkedIn out of this interview. Me, I've just added you.
Bonus.
Glenn, thank you so much for coming on Consulting Leaders.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Leaders Podcast. We hope you learned valuable lessons on how to grow your practice and take your business to the next level. Make sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening to this show so you never miss an episode. To apply and be a guest on the show, click the link in the description. See you next time.